Promises Decay, and Other Monstrosities. By Jack Clubb. Dedicated to Richard. Obsidian Mirror. Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster, and if you gaze into the abyss also gazes into you. Friedrich Nietzsche. Chapter 1. 1. As they came around the corner, just off the highway, the massive steel mill dominated the view. Smokestacks gave vent to great plumes of exhaust that cascaded across the city's skyline. A sinister fog blanketed the ground. The most impressive feature of the plant must have been the arc light. A big gas portal flame that burned off the day's aggregations. All along the bottom row, smelting pots were lit amidst 100 glowing eyes, and the blast furnaces stood by like aged sentinels. To an outsider, the scene could have been mistaken for some otherworldly hell. What made him come so far from home? Was it fate, or was it destiny? One being tied inexorably to the other. Though, the paths invariably lead to the same place. He was sent here by the agency. If he wanted management, they were going to make him work for it. Which was fine. He welcomed the change. Leaving the plant and the bituminous gloom behind, the horizon blended into the cityscape's bleakness. Buildings appeared like tombstones well off in the distance, and phantoms skirted by. Tempests of smog parted and wed as they entered the downtown district. Abandoned buildings eventually gave way to a deserted school, and just around the bend was an elegant park. The car wound its way through the streets, and coming out onto what seemed to be the main boulevard, they slowed to let some pedestrians pass. Speeding through the back roads, they crossed a set of tracks. Still, deeper within the city and into the mist, we go. You said 2147, right? Yeah, Edison. He blinked at the paper to make sure he had read the address correctly. Black house on the left. You ever been there before, to that residence? No. Is there something I should know? Nah, just asking, friend, the cabbie answered as he navigated through a side street. Making a right onto the viaduct, they passed an abandoned chocolate factory. All at once, the brakes squealed as they came to a halt. We're here, he said. Leaning up, he pointed forward. The passenger's attention moved to the solemn estate. It was too dark to make out any of the details. Dust motes danced in the vehicle's headlights but didn't penetrate its inky blackness, stopping just short of the property's edge. A barred privacy fence enclosed the ominous facade. The driver helped his fare get the rest of his belongings out of the trunk. The arrived guest paid him, and no sooner and the car was speeding back the way it had come. Grey smoke followed in its wake. 2. Murky shadows played amid the gloomy evening that coiled its descent into dusk. In the declining light, he peered up the short path. Pulling out the dozen or so skeleton keys from his coat pocket, he unlocked the barred gate. The chains, rattling like alarms as he knocked away the age of acclimated dust, a host of spiders escaping. They spooled their webs, making descents of their own. From somewhere off in the distance a church bell tolled, and a dog bayed in return, reminding one of their sins and another of their sacrifice for those corruptions. A heavy fog developed, and the visitor could see his breath. This surely being a sign that he should move along. As the bruised sky settled upon him, August howled with a bitter rage that was discerning to his already frayed nerves. Macabre whisperings seemed to be alerting each other as to his presence. As he pushed the bar free of the gate, it screamed in protest at the violation. An immense conifer appeared as a hand would have, had it been clutching the moon, or a skull. While another melancholy oak stood by, swaying in the wind. At that point, a curious circumstance occurred. As the house drew nearer, everything about him became disquieting and distant. The trees that mourned history long forgotten could no longer be heard. Those cold iron gates, too far down the incline to feel, and those bothersome leaves, crackling with despair, all but lost. Just those old decrepit steps remained in his way. Stepping further back, he took in the complete scene. The dwelling, formed of dark grey masonry and matching painted wood, complemented each other in their grimness. Clamber ivy grew up and around any area that would allow its advance. Though, it was a sad lot, for he surmised that little sunlight struck their desolation. The traveler, pushing the front door open, awkwardly switched on a flashlight. Shining it through, he announced, "I'm coming in." As he crossed over the threshold, he felt a wariness in his breast. In the fist opposite that held the torch, he had a hawk-billed knife. Walking all the way in, he noted the light switches. Flicking the first one, the office was at once plunged into illumination. Examining the foyer, it was occult in its dank oppression and gloomy in its appearance. He jumped when seeing a figure opposite himself, but quickly realized it was his own reflection in a gilded mirror that was suspended on the wall. After returning with his luggage, he noticed his front door was ajar. Stepping inside, he ran his palm along the wall and finding a switch, he flicked it on. The first thing he noticed was that there was a man levitating about a foot off the ground in the center of the room. When he turned on the light, both men regarded each other. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment had passed, and the intruder fell to the floor. In a flash, the vagrant was down the steps and out of the apartment, leaving not a trace behind. 3. The guest, having secured the exits, tried to call the agency, but the signal was still dead. Inside his pocket, he was reassured by the steel within. Max had sent him here personally to appraise the property. So, he made a circuit around the upper floor. Discovering nothing that would warrant against the purchase of the building, he wrote it all down in his work journal. A bit later, on his way back from the gas station, he could have sworn that he saw someone sitting by the front gate. With all the urban beasts lurking about, it wasn't a big deal. Once he got around the doorway, the apparition vanished like the mist. With the trip to the corner store completed, he had gathered the information needed to conclude his report. Tomorrow, he will notify the agency. Moving into the room, he peered out the blinds and was surprised by what he saw. He quickly unbound the doors. There was an immense yard and an adorned lake. Verdant bowers hugged the bank and an arbor with ivy slivered up its face, ornamenting the visage. The pond, appearing as fresh oil paint on a canvas. An image of still life, placid upon the surface. Leaving the doors ajar, he took a seat on the couch. His things were all spread out next to him. The trunk and keys. His composition material, wardrobes, and sketchbooks. Picking up the closest, he considered the stained pages. They classed the images within as two distinct types, portraits and figures. He knew the models in this black volume from the last couple of years. Some being paid to set, others were not. Their forms, adopted for study, had gotten to play his muse for a day. How many had played well? He asked himself as he traced the outline of one figure with his index finger. Growing bored with half-hearted illusions, he considered the red sketchbook. Just beyond that on the floor, was his armed .357 Magnum. After the last encounter with Curtis, he purchased it. Shouch, he set his easel up and sketched by the open window for a bit, setting down a draft of the arcade doors and four-poster bed. He took his time to include the gilded frames and baroque wallpaper motif. After grabbing another beer, he thumbed through his sketchbooks once again. His attention slipped back to that red book. Clutching it and pulling off its elastic binding, he scanned the detailed depictions. They were all the same subject. The first page had her profile like a cameo, displaying an example of what the artist considered elegant. Here's another, where her exquisitely cut frame is in a resting position. All the shadows suggested an identical precision to life. Here was a complete page devoted to the same woman staring at the observer. What did such an expression communicate or speak? It was difficult to understand her objectives. Had the artisan recommended that she consider him thus, or was it her own invention? The final pose in the volume was a profile of the same model. Her features provoking the viewer to speak. By the mere phrase alone, if uttered by the observer, would give her the ability to manifest further reaches of desire. It was in her eyes. The sketchbook dropped out of his hand as he fell into a cold slumber. Now that he was unconscious, the urgency of the scene became more intense. The sketch developed into a complete oil painting. She stepped out from the frame, thick vapor followed her through. The dream was a recollection, from a time that she was posing on the bed. Coming up behind the painter to study the results, she was nursing a cup of wine and paused before his creation, assessing it. In these quiet moments is when he could truly contemplate her. Was she one of those takers of hearts, like a succubus? Or was it possible that she was just a misunderstood beauty? As he considered these truths amid the recollection, being projected from within the dream, "I cherish it," she declared. He knew she meant it. To Alex, the only certainty that was lacking was her consent. If each conquest in his life had failed, as had seemingly been the case, all could be undone with only this one praise. If she expressed her assessment, rendering them a success, in effect, they would develop into such. Nodding her head in assent, she reminded him of a sculpture of Venus by Bernini. The mad prince of the Renaissance. She, by her very essence, presented the voyeur with notions akin to a quickening storm. She carried the glamours and sway that someone 200 years ago would have been accused of using black magic and they would have burned at the stake for such seductions. 4. Alex woke up with the sunlight glaring in his eyes from having left the double doors open all night. He tried to recall the events leading up to when he had fallen asleep. Nothing. Had he been dreaming? Hollowing out an emptiness and depositing it upon the doorstep of his awareness in the manner that only dreams can convey? For these are the impressions that persisted behind his waking mind and delivered them in small increments of sadness throughout his day. They're the profound feelings inspired by someone who has lived through dark times and experienced a want of internment because of a personal loss. His reverie being broken by an insistent sound. At once, he realized it was the house phone. Hello? The line was cracking, and no one spoke from the other side. A moment later, the phone in his hand jogging his memory, he searched through his jacket pocket. Finding the agency's card, he put each number into tray dial. After a pause and a strange click, hello? A voice asked from the other end of the line, like something out of an old black and white film. Sunset Hills Investments, Mark speaking. Hey, it's me. Alex, my man? How was your trip? It was a complete nightmare. I almost got robbed in St. Louis. I bet it was crazy. Slight echoes radiated in the line. So, what have you got for me? Hopefully, some good news? Yeah. I think it looks nice and would make a fine investment for the agency. When's it from? Turn of the century? Which one? Last one. Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is file the ruling over to Max and I'll send a team out to you. How is it down there? Scary? When I first got here, there was a levitating homeless guy in my living room. You'll have to tell me all about it the next time I see you. Sure. Hey, so my cousin Michelle is from there. Yeah, I remember her from the party. Yes, the party. I gave her your contact info. I think she wanted a tattoo or something. At the mention of his old job, he saw a flashing red light. How are you doing besides that, man? Not awful. Glad to get this brief vacation in. They both laughed. Albeit, only long enough for what was proper. Life's psychological formalities. Oh, do you have any questions? I was going to ask, do you know anything about the neighbors? Sure, it says here that they have lived there for 10 years. Are they the estate owners? No. Their first names are Holly and Clark. Okay, cool. I'll talk to you in a couple of days. Call us if you need anything. Sounds good. With the call over, he wanted to grab a beer, but the phone rang a minute afterward. Hello? White noise sizzled within the line. Yes? Are you there? Yep, I'm here. Who's this? Alex? Hey, it's Michelle. Michelle? There was silence. Oh, Mark's cousin. Michelle Fleming? Yes, you remember me? I met you at the gathering last August. Yeah. So, how have you been? Oh, I've been good. I'm in town for about a week for work. I remember you're from Alton, right? Born and raised. How do you like it? It's interesting to say the least. Yeah? It's a lot different from Edwardsville. It reminds me of St. Louis, or a bigger granite city. For sure. So, what's up on some ink? What? Tattoos. I need to get a piece. You're still giving them, right? A flashback of being there and the fight flooded his vision. Red warning signs going off in his mind. Hey Michelle, can I call you back? Did I say something to upset you? No. It's just I'm not doing any ink right now. Well, for a while I suppose, if that's what you wanted. No, not just that. I wanted to see you. What else has been happening? You're still painting, right? I mean, at the party you were so passionate about your art when we talked. Oh no, I mean yeah, I didn't quit. I'm still doing stuff. That's awesome. There was an abrupt silence as he mused. What stuff was he doing and when was he doing it? I'm working on a series of compositions to put into a book. Oils, right? Of course. I actually just finished a sketch. He remembered her now. She was beautiful. Though he pushed the thought aside. What did you draw? When? Whatever sketch you had finished. What was it of? Oh, honestly, I only did a study of the four-poster bed. That sounds kind of boring. I have no models out here to pose for me. Oh. As in, a model in one of your portraits? Yes. Oh, I've done that before. Wanna paint me? I mean, I could. I want a copy or print or whatever it's called when you're finished. Sure. They arranged a time for later in the evening. After he had gotten off the phone, he decided that maybe this trip would not be so dull after all. 5. With the phone calls out of the way, he did some cleaning. After a day of lounging around and with company coming over, he had to make sure everything was in its place. Alex, upon returning to the bedroom, spotted by the light switch a slight tear in the wallpaper. He wondered as to what design it was. What if the agency bought the property only to discover that it's a dump? As he advanced through the hall, he checked his phone. Damn, still no service. He would have to figure it out when he came back. Plugging it in, he descended the steps to the end of the foyer and glanced out the window. A girl was walking a dog down the road, and some neighbors were out in their yards. Both were involved in conversation. Walking into the kitchen, he went out the back door. The lake was magnificent today, he mused. As he was going around the side of the building, he could hear voices. He stopped. All at once, panic seized him. He wondered as to where all this sudden dread had appeared from. Checking his top pocket, the weight of his brass knuckles beneath lent him courage and he headed out on his journey once again. 6. After getting lost and backtracking, he asked Awa directions to the hardware store. 10 nervous moments of thinking he had gotten lost again and he found himself finally approached the backside of a plaza. In front of the edifice, he discovered many businesses along the gallery. Alex, heading down another block, found the right place. Though, reaching it, saw that they had a closed sign up. Deciding he would just go back to the apartment, he was waiting at the crosswalk of the intersection when he was overcome by an overwhelming feeling of self-consciousness again. The light seemed as if paused on red. There were several vehicles at each of the divisions and he could feel their eyes upon him. He wondered if the occupants within were questioning him, and if they were, what were they thinking? Who's this? That person is different. When did he get here? What's he running from? His stomach felt sick. A car's horn brought him back from his supplications. He could discern many of the vehicle's inhabitants' voices, passing from one person to another. None of this should bother him, he told himself. Then, he checked the clock that was mounted to the bank wall. It read 3:30 p.m. Noticing that to cross the intersection he only needed to walk. The light had turned green. Once he had cut across Madison Avenue, he navigated through a restaurant's parking lot. A red automobile with a soccer mom inside and disdain in her eyes considered him up and down. She pulled off with her screaming kids in the back seat. On the other side of her, hidden from plain view, was a police cruiser. Nodding to the parked driver, Alex jogged up the steps into the library, away from the judgmental eyes of all the self-absorbed people that surrounded the mini-mall. 7. The double doors clicked shut behind Alex as the librarian, from behind the counter who had glasses on, regarded him with such a stare of apathy that he was instantly filled with anxiety. So much so that when he looked around at all the patrons, he was dismayed and felt even more out of place. There was a set of metal detectors that reminded Alex of Wild West saloon doors that swing back and forth. To the left were several tables with computers set up. Many people were standing and sitting. Off to his right, there were rows of books. In the rear was a giant fireplace and magazine rack. Out of the 20 individuals in viewing distance, they all glowered, as if watching how he was to be received by the reception librarian. Only after the newcomer didn't pull out a handgun and shoot her in the face did they carry on with whatever it was that they had been doing. After filling out all the information for a lending card, the same woman gave it to him. "Thank you." She didn't respond. As he was peering around, she kept a careful eye on him. Though, it wasn't long before another woman arrived, and they began gossiping. After examining a section called New Books, he made his way back to the reference desk. All the while, the strange people ogled him. He was relieved when the attendant appeared. This one, Alex had at first thought, was looking for something on the ground. She was bent over almost in half. Several minutes later, making her way up to the counter, she introduced herself as Mary and asked to see his card. Holding it up to her glasses, she gave it back and asked what he needed. "I was trying to find out some information about a residence here in town." "Maybe. Write it down for me," she said, handing him a notepad and pen. After writing the address, she punched the data into an ancient-looking computer. Giving him a curious glance, she told him to come back tomorrow, she would have something for him then. "What's it for?" she asked. "Well, I work for an agency, and we buy property," she waved the answer away. "Okay, we will let you know." With that, she began her journey back to the doors. After putting the card away, He had that same disquieting feeling of unease as before. What didn't help was the dozen people glaring at him from the computer rows. As he reached the saloon alarms, he regarded an odd blemish that was on the ceiling in front of the gates. Peering around, only one other person looked to have noticed it. This other observer was a curious man. He also had lunacy in his eyes. Listening, he was mumbling something about power lines and appeared to be mesmerized by that black spot. He stood by the windows, gawking up into the stigma. Alex passed through the exit and was at once face to face with a woman. She was blocking his path to the steps. Just standing there, neither walking nor retreating, with a blank expression on her face. He was minding his own business when she said, "You're the guy that moved into that apartment." "Excuse me?" She wouldn't respond and continued to stare ahead. Retreating in, he explained to the librarian about the unusual woman blocking the exit. "Oh Molly, she's always been like that." Looking over at the reference lady, she shook her head in agreement. Exiting, she was down on the sidewalk now. Skipping around. "Do I know you?" "I don't know you, but I know there's a curse on that building." As he passed her, he saw other people had noticed her rising voice. "It's tainted soil," she declared and began laughing and skipping toward him. All at once, looking up at the clock, he remembered Michelle was to be there in 10 minutes. When he turned at the corner, he couldn't hear the woman any longer. Chapter 2. 1. After becoming lost again, Alex made his way home. Bustling through the front door in a mad dash, he reached the top of the landing. Grabbing for, but just missing a hold on the banister, he fell. The ground was shaking beneath his feet. He was violently pitched forward, end over end. The lights blinked on and off. Everything for Alex was a jumble of events. He could hear the chandelier rattling back and forth, and there were the sounds of a camera going off, flashing in his face, blinding him. "Hey. Are you going to get up or not?" He opened his eyes to a blonde-haired girl with lots of makeup on studying him. At first, he tried to stand, but soon lost his balance and had to bow his head until it reeled to a stop. Oh my God, what happened? His stuff from the gas station was scattered on the floor. "Sir, it looks like you may have had an accident, and Alton had a minor earthquake," she said with amusement in her voice as she sat down next to him. "Does this happen a lot?" "No. It's never happened that I can remember," she answered, grabbing one of the cans and putting it to his head. "Michelle, how have you been?" "I've been good. Come on, let me show you around." "Hold that thought, I forgot something out in my car. I'll be right back." When she was down the steps, Alex got up and unlocked his own front door. As soon as he entered the apartment, it was as if he were in a different place and time altogether. It was obviously the same dwelling, albeit there was incense burning and music playing. The latter, from a sconce that fumes and vapors cascaded from, and the former, from an old phonograph. The voices that were whispering stole his attention. That same flashing pulse began. Click. Click, the light in the living room came on. "What, you won't drink these?" It was Michelle, returned. She also had thought of drinking as well, for she had a big box of beer with her. "I didn't say that." Though, in his mind, he was trying to make sense of the nonsensible. 2. 15 minutes later, and they were making their way downstairs to the kitchen. The rooms took them back in time. All the neoclassical paintings that dominated the walls of the manor were interesting, filling their heads with visions of angels and demons. One painting was of a boy who was bound to a rock by his father who was about to do the youth harm. However, there was an angel that appeared at the last possible moment and had stayed his hand. Just in time, it appeared. "What's it called?" she asked. Observing the placard at the bottom, he read, "The Sacrifice of Isaac." "Oh well. That's nice." A silence issued as they both peered gravely at each other in contemplation, and then giggled. "So, when do you want to start?" "Start? Oh, painting? Now, come on, let's go," he said as he took her by the hand, and they withdrew back the way they had come. After deciding to go into the bedroom, Alex realized they couldn't even begin yet. "Why not?" "I don't have any paint thinner." "That's where I came from earlier." The hardware store was closed. "Oh, Eva's? That's the place." They had a closed sign in front. "Yeah, old man Eva's drinks a lot." "Well, the old man needs to open up during business hours." As he was looking through his things, Michelle had changed her clothes and was practicing poses. "I bought this. I thought we might need it," she said, rolling around on the bed, drunk. "Well," he stammered. We can still get the sketches done, anyway. They laughed and joked with each other the rest of the evening. In fact, Alex couldn't remember the last time he had this much fun. They were sitting on the couch while he worked on the drawings, studying her form. Soon, Michelle was playing on her phone when he was reminded of his own. He went and grabbed it from the hall. That sucks. What do you mean? I haven't been able to get service since I got into Alton. I've heard that before. It is something to do with the area coverage, or roaming, I think. Here, you can use mine if you need to, she said as she proffered the device. Nah, I'm good. I'll just use old trusty if I need to make a call. His gaze fell to the old telephone on the table, and they both laughed again. Each being intoxicated and feeling a light buzz was when an awkward silence settled upon them. So, how about working on one for me? She asked, looking through his efforts thus far. Sure, what do you have in mind? Getting up, she closed the double doors. When she turned back around, she undid the robe, casting away the illusions that would reveal a more meaningful piece of art, she told him. 3. The slight earthquake from earlier in the evening had upset many bound abstractions and in effect, setting them free. Out in the street, as the quake was happening, a few car alarms screamed and several of the local dogs bayed. It also brought about crawling things that had been long dead and forgotten. What about those things that are stuck in between our dimension and the next sphere of existence? Where do they fit in? The antique Rolls-Royce stopped on the side of the house. The driver got out and unbound the gate. Glancing up at the window, Holly wondered how many times they had played this game. Regarding the man, she thought about all the reasons she loved him. Was it that he had saved her from the life that she was until he had found her, bound to suffer? Or was it his suits that she had loved to dry clean, or his razor-sharp businessman-like attitude? It very well could have been none of these. Surveying the sky, Holly mentioned it was a full moon. Clark, by reply, remarked that this was the night that all the crazies would be roaming about. She realized as well as he did, such superstitions were a weak argument. Clark, pointing to the upstairs balcony, said, "We have neighbors again." As he spoke, a woman in a red robe came out and closed the doors. Must be an artist. Why do you say that? Because of the easel that I just saw, he answered, pointing up. Honey. Yes? Will you start dinner? Was going to grab some drinks for me and the boys. Sure, she answered, resigned. Driving up to the front, he let her out. As soon as she went inside, he stopped and exited the vehicle. He lit a cigarette and wondered how to approach the situation now that there were more elements involved. This changed things. Assuming that he would figure it out later, he flicked his cigarette towards the person who was by the gate. 4. Let me see? Michelle asked, leaning over. Oh, she squealed, it looks just like me. After all the disciplined drawing, Alex's arm hurt in the crook of his elbow. What's wrong? My elbow has been messing with me ever since the fight. How are you doing with all of that? She asked as she sat back on the couch. One breast was sneaking its way out. He realized he was staring and glanced away. Mark told me what happened. The party, all of it. I just didn't ask about that stuff, you remember, when we met. I figured it would have been inappropriate for me to. Which part? That guy, Curtis, or whatever his name was? Nothing. I mean, he still walks the streets. I'm not sure if he got into any trouble or not. She nodded her head in assent. Hell, I don't even know if it even matters anymore. He said more to himself than to her. And she asked. What about her family now? I don't have any idea, he shook his head. I'm assuming they hate me. Clearly, he didn't want to talk about it any longer. She let the subject drop and leaned over and kissed him. Lifting herself up, she walked over to the double doors and peeked out of the blinds. It doesn't frighten you? Not anymore. Well, not since the dreams have stopped. No, I meant staying here in this old house, all alone. No. That kind of stuff doesn't bother me. Now what does, is the crazy people in this town. Huh? Funny. They have just as many in Edwardsville. Yeah, but they all work at the courthouse. At this, she smiled. Enough about me. I'm not that important. How have you been doing? Besides my dad's girlfriend sending me invites to parties, okay. That's not too bad. It could be worse, he said as he grabbed the empty beer cans. She stopped and glared at him as if he'd insulted her. Besides the fact that she's only 2 years older than me. Oh, and that my dad just got out of prison 3 years ago for murdering my mum. Alex just looked at her, shocked. Oh, wow. I'm sorry. I mean, I would never have guessed. Nah, it's cool. How would you? Mark avoids the whole situation. I dealt with it all a long time ago. So, Mark is your cousin, by blood? Yes, on my dad's side. So, since your mum passed and your dad? My grandma raised me. Though, growing up, I developed a disdain for their opinions. Well, hers and my dad's. This last part she sort of drew out. Besides all of that, I'm fine. I don't even tell people about it. Kyle used to say that my story is intimidating and dramatic. She replied matter-of-factly. However, to him, Alex, her story was dramatic and intimidating. Nonetheless, his lot was just as bad. She looked down in contemplation and noticed how he was unconsciously rubbing his arm again. Moving to sit on the couch beside him, she said, "Here, let me see that." "What?" "Oh." She began massaging it, asking him if it felt good. He shook his head. She told him how she had considered massage therapy before she moved into accounting. As she did so, he leaned over and kissed her, putting his hand on her breast, pinching the nipple beneath. His elbow forgotten, she straddled him on the couch. "Whoa. What? What's wrong?" Is it, I mean, do you not think I'm pretty?" she asked. Her locks hung around the sides of her face. She sat there with a robe opened in the front, her breasts pushed together. "No. I mean, I do, of course, I do." He readjusted himself to prove the fact. But what? "I don't know if I'm ready." "Oh. Is it that girl?" At this, he just looked down. "How long is this going to last?" I don't know. Look, I don't feel so good. I think I may call it a night." "Hey, what do you have to do tomorrow?" "Just some stuff around here." Kissing him, she laid her head on his chest. The foundation and hairspray that she smelled like wasn't so bad. Before long, they were both asleep. Had they been awake a few minutes later, they may have caught the neighbors returning home. 5. In his dream, he is painting, and the sun is shining through the studio window. She put her arms around him from behind as bubbles came out of his mouth, catching the light, creating a rainbow hue that was reflected within itself. The woman from the red sketchbook leaned over and popped it. Water splashed everywhere. Then, they were both in the bed and he had his arms wrapped around her. He told her he loved her, and from there, Alex sunk into a far deeper slumber than before. Chapter 3. 1. Up and up and up, his sleeping mind went. This is the part of his dreams that he can never quite remember. Up so high, he rose. For now, he would stay put, resting upon the clouds. This is the place where he sees his higher self, sometimes called his second sight. The being from which, in Alex's case, pushes him in directions that seem to play such a significant role in his life. This entity was neither living nor dead. However, tonight, events played out a little differently. Destiny had other plans. The creeping thing stalked. He felt at the cloud to make sure it was solid enough to stand upon. Now that everything was as it should be, he watched the lights and wondered about many strange visions. The prisma forms, not being understood, could gain splendor from following one or another of their kind around. They did not try this on all the shells. It snuffed itself out, its inevitable demise delivered unto an emptiness complete. He did what so many others have done in dreams. He reached out and grabbed the thought as it floated by. The chemical matter coalesced and a slight glitching occurred. Her form manifested. What was her name? He couldn't seem to remember. Though, it didn't matter right now. Because none of the elements of his waking world hold court here. Something was calling to his unwoke mind, to be born back into that studio and the same memory as before. 4. In his dreamscape, memories were delegated beyond the mere realm of consciousness, which is more times than not upon waking, forgotten. How many times has this happened? How many beginnings and unendings needed to occur? Seeking the repetition of that which our hearts are most drawn to hold relevance in this timeless place. Humans have always been gluttons for their own mild punishments. Thrusting the mortifications upon tired flesh and loose limbs, giving out guilt in both virtue and vice. To be paid, in blood. The dream has further progressed. Now, she lays in front of him as the spring light comes through the east-facing window. He pulls the shoulder of her robe down further. Shrugging it off the rest of the way, she stretched her back in an arch. The movements caused her robe to lose its hold on her hip, revealing her languid form. He ran his index finger over her shoulder. The flesh was so succulent and ripe. She backed into him, furthering the storm. He returned the crashing. Reaching down, a cold hand grabbed him by the wrist, and yanked him into the darkness. As he was pulled, the two arms had come over each side, holding him taut. "What the fuck? Help me," he cried as the arms started to constrict. Reaching out, he scrambled for purchase, but he was panicking for no reason. He was only spinning, and even that was coming to a stop now that the inertia's flux was exhausted. He floated there, and as he watched, he discerned a form in the dark. Without warning, it shot out, lunging for him through the bed from within the depths of the house. Fearing the worst, the beast went right past him. As he levitated, he glimpsed many glowing forms within the property. Though, the torrent burned itself out and had already spun out of motion, like a top. "No!" he screamed, sober and dry inside the confines of the dark bedroom. "You, okay?" "Yeah," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I had a bad dream." "It's fine. Lay back down with me. You can watch me die a little longer." "What?" "Come here. We still have time to sleep." "Okay." In the dark, she backed into him at a grind and his waves began afresh, albeit with the impending awareness that time was fleeting. Soon, the crashing from the waves threatened to overwhelm him. "Alex." His enthusiasm only igniting her further. "Oh Alex." She reached back behind herself and undid his trousers. Two hands fondled him. One reached inside. In a panic the two became three and soon a fourth. His sounds of surprise lost as a whine of enthusiasm pushed her to the brink of ecstasy. "Alex, fuck me." He followed her demands. "Goddamn it, I missed you, Amy. God, how I've missed you." She slowed down, taking him back out. Everything, for the next few minutes without warning, fell out of balance. A rapture of illumination came beating upon the door of reality. As if he was still, an awareness of Michelle's anger gripped him. "Look. I don't mind indulging in your fantasies a little, but to call me another girl's name is a different story. I don't know what Mark meant by how fucked up you are." "What, he told you that?" "Look, it doesn't matter. I don't know how this even happened." "You're going to have to move on," she said, putting her pants on, breasts slightly bouncing. Grabbing her shirt, she gave him an angry glare and dumped into the bathroom, slamming the door behind herself. On his side, the pictures rattled on the walls and the rushing air threw every piece of paper into a tempest. On her side, it was quite a different matter altogether. As soon as the door had closed, she found herself in a boiler room listening to the steady drip from the condensation that gathered above. The pipes themselves, being pushed to the pressure point, began to whistle. On the other side of the room, one busted. Its release of air made her look in its direction. "Alex?" she whispered. If this was some sort of game, she would give him a piece of her mind. Surveying the area, she snuck around the corner. The further she went, the deeper the water at her feet became. Figuring she was on a decline though, the sounds of her own sloshing footsteps soon replaced these thoughts. The walkway became more congested. As she slowed her pace, her instincts told her that something was waiting just around the bend. That drip from the pipes sounded as if it were getting louder. "Alex, what the hell is going on?" "Hello?" she whispered. "Hello?" Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when she came around the corner. There was a woman who appeared to be much more frightened than Michelle was. Quickly, she sloshed to her. There was blood on her face and neck. "Oh my God," Michelle said, trying to pull the cuffs off. The woman looked at her like she was incredibly relieved that she was there. Michelle didn't want to ask her if she was all right, so instead she gave her some comforting words. "I'm going to get you out of here." She just had to figure out exactly where they were at. The overwhelming stench of decaying meat hit her sinuses. Glancing down, she first noticed that the other woman was pissing herself. Second, that the liquid on the ground wasn't merely condensation or flood water. It was a soup of what looked like sewer muck or something else. Was that going out? He noticed the black rot had traveled all the way across the ceiling. He assumed it was something that they knew about. Once outside, the sky was turning from afternoon into evening and a slight chill had crept into the air. Strolling across the four-way stop, there was the same cop car with the same two officers, eyeing him again. Though, having forgotten his brass knuckles, he didn't worry too much about them. They reminded him of the dummies that were put into decoy cars to freak people out. These were genuine enough though. Their heads followed him as he left. As he walked into the hardware store, many varying hues presented themselves. There were more registers and workers than there appeared to be customers inside. As soon as he got close to the aisles, he nodded to one of the older workers that was approaching him. "Hi, can I help you, son?" the old man asked loudly. "Probably not. What have you got there?" "A library, report. Is that right?" "Yeah, why are you talking so loud?" Everyone was watching the exchange at this point. "Oh, I don't know," he answered as he walked away from him. "Excuse me, sir." "Excuse me, sir?" Alex stopped. "What? Can I help you?" "Mineral spirits. Do you have any?" "Now, you don't take that tone with me." "Why? What are you going to do about it?" "Jim," said a woman who was coming up. "Sir, please find what you need, and go." "Yes, ma'am," Alex said and walked away toward the painting aisle. He could see it from where he was now. Once he got there, he noticed a man walking away. Besides that, there didn't seem to be any other customers in sight. Alex, minding his own business, wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. "Damn," he whispered. They were out of thinner. Bending down to see if there was a can at the bottom, he almost slipped. His gaze, following along the aisle floor, when he thought the other customer had pissed himself. When on closer inspection, it smelled like gas. He had taken the last can of paint thinner and was now pouring it all over himself. Removing his shoes at some point, he was rambling and making suction sounds as he walked backwards. Alex recognized him now, from the library. The only other person to see the rot. He was staring at him as if he knew what he was thinking. "They're in the power lines," he cried. "All of them. They are going to listen to you, and then you will see. It feeds on your fears. Fears of the truth. Your truth." Alex was stunned like a deer in headlights. Cursed. Cursed. "It's coming for you, boy. They're in the goddamn power lines. The rot's inside me now." "What are you doing?" he whispered. Shaking himself from the mesmerizing gaze, he stumbled to the furthest reaches of the aisle. The worker, Jim, whom he had first encountered, and the woman, were talking and coming his way. At the sound of yelling, they both looked. He pointed to their irate customer. "Cursed. I got to get it out of me." Following his pointer finger, they saw what he was talking about now. There was that same black rot all over the ceiling in big patches. The workers were almost to him. However, in the meantime the man had produced a lighter, and on his first try, he went up in flames. At that point, the workers came walking up and more were approaching. The madman kept on yelling and swinging his arms around. He screamed as another woman approached Alex and said, "You need to leave." Stepping backward, he looked up and saw where the black substance had dripped down in spots by the corner. It appeared almost like tree roots, and to be going in and out of the paneling. Exiting the doors, he closed his eyes to the breeze. The police car was gone, or he would have alerted them to the situation. He headed home. 2. Traveling down Cleveland, Alex only had to follow Madison Avenue to Edison. The neighborhood was quiet today. Though, his musings soon turned to Michelle. She was a sweet girl, but a bit too dramatic for his tastes. Maybe, once upon a time he would have considered a girl like that, but not anymore. He pulled his jacket a little closer to himself as the sky was growing into cool hues. "Damn, this is a long road," he was musing. Suddenly, without warning, his attention was stolen when he saw one of the town's lunatics up ahead. Oh Lord! He had spotted this same man on one of his other wanderings. This time, he was chasing some children. What the fuck? They weren't that far away. He could try to catch up to them and see why he was in pursuit. He took off in a mad dash to catch up to them. Bounding around the corner, he came to a crossroads. There were woods off to his left behind a set of apartments. Going down to the end, he thought he had lost them, but then a man appeared. Alex, giving chase, could hear a fire truck in the distance. Presumably going to the hardware store. When he reached a copse of trees, he soon realized he had entered the wooded area he was trying to avoid. To his left was a shelter, and up ahead were 2 dolmens. He had vanished. Still, he had to make sure those kids weren't in any danger. He ran on. Soon he realized he had lost them. Stopping to catch his breath, he put his hands on his knees. "Fuck," he yelled out loud. His chest burned, and his head thumped. He could discern something, like water splashing up ahead. When he got around the crest, there was a stream. At once, he saw the man was going down the rise. He gave chase at a startling speed. Clunk. Alex hit his head on a thick tree branch and lost consciousness. 3. Having knocked himself out coming down the incline, he had inadvertently woken his third eye. Here, in the murky woods, things differ from those more trivial areas of habitation. These woods have a long history of whispered rumors about strange happenings that took place under the moonlight. Here, life had a translucent quality that withstood the natural sufferings of man, releasing one's mind to wonder. He was walking through the trees and yelled to see if anyone was there. A moment later, his voice echoed back. The light of ether, and the dusk, were drawing into one another so as to create a marriage of astral convergent energy. It didn't matter which one was leading him in the right direction. There was a form on the path ahead. At first, seeing that it was a woman not much older than Michelle or Amy, he approached. She was on her knees in a dirty dress with the arms cut out and she wore a veil of rags over her eyes. He asked her if she needed help. She pointed along the path. What light end of the day's gloom was fading. Though, the strange blue that lit the direction that she was pointing in, was growing ever brighter. That otherworldly hue. A phantom darted through the trees behind and soon after, one from up ahead. In either case, he was too slow in his movements to gain a glimpse of the Capriform. "Why am I here?" he asked her. In response, she pointed up along the path, as if he was to go that way. "Okay, well, we will go together," Alex said as he put his arms around her. She began rocking her head back and forth in protest, and when she tried to speak, no words were forthcoming. "What is it?" he asked, not being able to make out what she was trying to say. After looking at the ground with disdain, she motioned for him to come closer. Bending, he put his ear to her mouth. All he could hear were mild crunching sounds. As soon as he turned his head, he could smell her bitter breath mixed with dead leaves. Directing his attention to her open hand, she malevolently offered him a handful of bloody maggots. He looked at her in repulsion and backed away as she began to cackle. It was offensive. Then, she bent her arm back as if to throw them in his face. When he flinched, she went into another fit of her strange laughter. Switching her demeanor, she put them into her mouth. Alex backed away from the macabre woman. Duly, she issued forth another wicked cackle. This one made his blood run cold. He backed away towards what looked like a shack. Albeit, when he had turned, being the ever non-clumsy traveler, tripped, and upon trying to brace his fall, woke himself. 4. Fuck, Alex cried out as he lunged to break his fall. A moment later, he could hear laughing. Peering about himself, it was as if he was still in a dream. However, there seemed to be several other people in the room and his head reeled. It was dark. Jumping to his feet, he wobbled and had to sit down again. There was a fire going, and the crazy woman from the library was there, Molly. She was creaking back and forth in a rocking chair. Over in the corner was the man who had been chasing the children. "You," he said. "You," she hissed back. "Calm down, and leave my brother alone," she said, pacifying him. She wore the same blank stare as before. "He doesn't mean no one no harm. Except for being aggravating me, that is." At this, the shadows in the room stirred. The fire popped and a sizzling issued from the sap within the logs. "Jojo, you go outside for a bit." The man whined at the order, and when she said his name again, he sounded as if he had said something under his breath, but quickly clambered out the door. "What's going on?" "What's going on is you were chasing my brother and hit your head, and instead of letting the coyotes chew on you, he brought you in. Saved me a trip, though." "But what about the kids?" "What kids?" "The ones he was chasing." "Told you, he doesn't be chasing no damn kids. He just knows phantoms. Those he runs around with, hooting and hollering all the damn time." Alex mused over this. "Anyway, I thought you were a devil." "Then I understand you're not that at all." "What?" "You came looking for answers, right?" She was growing impatient. "God help me if this bag of bones doesn't listen," she warned as he watched a disturbance caught in the shadows. Her rhythmical swaying in the rocking chair was calming. Alex was gazing ever further into the dark corner when she said, "Don't you be troubled by them. They're not your enemy. Here, want some?" She offered him a bottle. At first, he wasn't too sure about it, but for all the woman's appearances, she seemed to be clean. He took it and drank. Grimacing, he handed it back. "What have you come to find out?" "I don't." "Damn it, she said as the shadows accosted themselves. Taking a drink, she bit back that. This seemed to calm her a little. Handing it back over, she just kept rocking back and forth. What did you mean by cursed? Someone else said the same thing. Why? Not you, drawing the words out as she leaned back, still looking right above him. That place you stay in. Do you know anything about it? A chair at the far end of the room moved a little. He shook his head no. My mama, she used to know a man that lived there. Clark? He asked. Will you shut up and let me tell it? She asked. Well, Mama used to know a man that lived where you live. On that same side. Pat was his name. One of those fancy men who took pictures of people and worked for a newspaper in St. Louis. Know any of this? He shook his head in dissent. His eyelids grew heavy from the motion of the chair. Even if she was telling the truth or not, Mama had a crush on him, but he wasn't that way, you see? Well, they would make another type of magic together. He knew things, and she knew things. Besides these things, there was no common ground. That man, the drive, he can do things on his own. Move around. Put himself in one place and then be in another. Scary thing, that ability. The shadow forms stirred. Soon after, some girls from the college, those prissy ones, started coming up missing. About this same time, mind you, his woman, I believe her name was, or is, Holly. Like mine, but with an H. Her man was acting strange about this time. He got to beating on her something terrible and whatnot, and in her times of sorrow, she took a drink and proffered it back to him and continued. Well, with Pat, and while Mama was there, they would all sit around playing cards or whatever. Real innocent stuff. One night, he had gotten to beating on her again. She shook her head, that woman of his, when he left to go do his killing or what have you, that Holly, got it in her pretty little head that she was going to leave him. After he came back, he knocked on Pat's door. And him being how he was, didn't want to have any confrontation or anything, so he didn't answer it. Well, he tried to get in, but Mama and Pat's magic being the stronger, differently, prevented that. Holly, fearing for her friend's safety, moseyed on back home in the middle of the night. A couple of days later, and that man Clark, she said the name with repulsion, caught up with Mama and Pat, and he said, taking a breath, he told Pat he would kill him, and then, he told Mama he would kill her too, or something worse, if they didn't mind their own. That's when Mama saw what he truly is. Well, I know another girl a few nights after word was found dead. From a butcher's knife. Bigger thing, the paper said. And they, the police, found pictures, where the woman had died, and no less from the other killing places. That meant they had themselves a serial killer. Then, it happened again a few nights after. That man and Holly got into it, and when she got over to Pat's, they didn't answer the door for her this time. She yelled and cried to be let in, but they stood resolute. But Pat, he had put a minor charm on him or what have you. As a result, he got revenge on him. She said this part with a detached sadness in her voice. He vanished a few nights later. By this point, the coppers were asking all kinds of questions, thinking it was him who was doing it, but he had disappeared. Just up and gone. Mama was heartbroken. Well, she never went close to that damn place again, and I lost my sight, and Jojo became, well, how he is, shortly thereafter. And your mother? Where is she now? Over yonder, buried. She nodded toward the door that Jojo had gone out. God rest her soul. I can tell you have another question. What is it? What did your mother see that he was? An agent to a much darker evil, she said with a faraway look. He's in submission to a Luciform, I think. Mama would never tell me. She didn't want to manifest anything. Luciform? Trust me when I say, you don't want to know. I'm sorry. No, sorry needed. There was a brief silence. All he could hear was the steady creaking of the chair and the popping of the fire. She looked straight ahead, seeming to muse over these things. Taking a long swig from the bottle, 2 big tears dripped down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she cut him off. I told you, there's no sorry needed. Now, I did what I said I'd do, and I did it, she said, addressing someone else in the room. That's it? Yeah, that's it. You can go now. I promised I'd tell it. Well, I've told you the story. Now you best be warned. I'm not getting involved anymore, and my brother better stop messing around over there as well, liable to get himself dead, or worse. You had better not either. It's wrong. The whole damn place. Get away from there. Thank you, he said as he got up. You can thank me by burning that place down. Others have tried, but no matter what they do, or how they try, it won't catch flame. It was built, all of Alton and Collinsville, on ancient burial grounds. Alex gulped back his surprise. Oh, you had that with you when Jojo brought you in. What's that? I'm blind. I just told you that. It's there though, she pointed. Again, thank you, he grabbed the tube. I told you what you can do to thank me, then she mumbled. Okay, I'll tell him. He was almost to the door when she said, that girl? Girl? The one you used to mess with. Let her go. She was no good for you. Besides, the dead don't have any place here. You focus on that other one and go back to where you came from. It was nice meeting you. Shut the door good on your way out. A moment later, the shadows in the room stirred once again. Chapter 5. 1. Boom, boom, boom. Someone was beating on the door downstairs. Alex, lifting his head up and peering at the clock, saw it was still early. Apparently, the neighbors weren't home, and he knew he wasn't expecting anyone. So, he just didn't mess with it. Still, the insistent tattoo continued. He put on his robe and stomped down the stairs to answer it. Yanking it open, he had to shield his eyes from the sun as he answered for two men. One was uniformed, and the other was wearing a faded grey suit. Mr. Hamilton? I'm Detective Abernathy. This is Deputy Craig. We're sorry to wake you. As he introduced himself, he leaned over and flicked his ashes and blew the smoke to the side of the porch guarding him. His sidekick had a fountain pen and leather-bound pad, taking notes. I'm not Mr. Hamilton. Oh, and you are? Mr. Reese. Alexander Reese. Mr. Reese, are you new to town? Yes. Yeah, I am for a few days. You seem nervous. Is everything okay? Yeah, you woke me up. What's this about? We're looking for the Hamiltons. Are they here? No, I guess not. Oh, you guess not? He shot a wary look at his underling. The detective's mustache and aviator sunglasses were comical, and Alex giggled. Is there something funny, Mr. Reese? Nothing. Do you know when they will be back? I have no idea, Deputy, he said as he looked back and forth between them. I work for an acquisitions company, and Dad did. What's it called? Sunset Hills, I thought that was a retirement place. They own a couple of funeral homes. We were thinking about buying the estate, so they sent me to check it out. I'm only in town for a few days. Few days? The detective asked. When Alex just shrugged his shoulders, he continued. Do you know if they own the lake out back? I don't think they own the property at all. The Hamiltons are the owners, and we suspect the lake out back as well. Really? He whispered to himself. Mark told him differently. The delegate spoke up. So, you're considering buying the building, but don't know who owns it? It's okay, said the agent. Leave it be. These things have a way of working themselves out. Alex could see his own reflection in the detective's sunglasses. Here, he handed him a card with his information on it. If you find out, call me please. As they walked away, a truck had parked and the people were exiting, seemingly headed their way. The uniformed man followed behind his master as would a lost puppy glaring at Alex until they reached the sidewalk. More loiterers had arrived by the time that they did so. Around the fence was a third set of bystanders walking through the yard. What's this all about? The detective turned. We found a body in the lake out back this morning and we're trying to find out who left it there. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? What? No. They walked away as a group of people came through the yard. The deputy told everyone out loud to go home. Alex, gaining the bend anyway, caught sight of the corpse that was still in the water, and was stunned. It was Jojo, Molly's brother, floating face up. The two law enforcement employees just looked on, taking careful note it seemed of everyone's responses, especially his. Everyone, go home, the agent yelled. Alex in disbelief, closed the door behind himself. 2. How was I supposed to know? Because I thought you knew everything about that bitch. Well, I don't. Sure, you do. Bet you remember what her pussy smells like, though. Yep, he said. Whack. She hit him so hard that his beer went flying against the wall. In a matter of only seconds, He jumped up, scaring the life out of her. I was just saying the guy was sleeping. Did you have to shoot him? Yes, Curtis. You were fucking around with his girlfriend, and I threatened to kill her. She screamed this last part in frustration. Drawing his hand back as if to strike her, she put her hands up to ward off the blow. When he didn't, she started crying and yelling. You're a fucking piece of shit, you know that? Goddamn it, he yelled, pointing at her. You better let me take off this time, and don't be following me. He turned towards the door, expect jump on back. Go ahead. Just remember, if you do, you're not just leaving me, you're walking out on us. This caused him to slow down. Now that she had stopped screaming, he could hear the children playing in the next room. If you could keep your dick in your pants. Everything will be fine, she said, calmer. Becky, if you're not being well, you know how you can be. Then I wouldn't leave, he answered. She strode up to him and put his head in her hands. Don't create problems and I won't have to clean up the mess and do the dirty work, okay? Becky stated wickedly. He shook his skull in agreement. 4. He was left with so very few options. 3. Alex, after going upstairs into his apartment, discovered the tube from the library. Opening it, he found it to be a single yellow sheet. On it was a typed report detailing how a Brian Rayner from Madison County had moved into this same address. One night, in a frenzy, had cut himself up, slicing and then tearing big, long pieces of his flesh from his body. They never recovered the weapon. At first, suspicions were that a loan shark had ordered the mutilation. While Rayner's explanation was that in the bathroom, each time he went inside or work at the Alton Steelworks around 4:30 a.m., he would somehow become trapped, and wouldn't explain any further. Just that, he would pass into another place, and there was a healer there, and it told him before it would release him, he had to first skin himself to a minor degree. He reported to the attending physician on duty before he fell into shock and suffered a congenital heart defect. As a result, died. Even now, no weapon was ever recovered. Albeit, they still wrote the entire business up as a suicide. Later, Rayner's former foreman from his work at the plant gave an account, saying that this act was out of character. He explained Rayner was the exact opposite of the person who was being portrayed by the events surrounding his death. He said in his statement that Brian was a quiet guy with little to no imagination from which all this could have sprung. At first, what Alex took to be a small stain on the page, he soon realized was a thumbnail of the apartment's restroom. Moving into the bedroom, he gazed in. He could tell what it was. In the photo, the room had been covered in blood, and big, long slices of meat were everywhere. Returning the report to the tube, he threw it into the corner. And what about what Molly told him? He paced into the foyer and looked down at the mirror. From this angle, he could see his neighbor's front door in the reflection. The more he thought about it, the more nervous he became. He went back in. As the Hamiltons were nice enough people, his instincts have been wrong before. Was Clark a cold-blooded serial killer? One thing he knew for sure was that he didn't want to find out. Walking into the dining hall, he put his gun in his pocket and glanced at the double windows of the east side of the bedroom that gazed out onto the entire front of the estate. Then, he crossed the room to do the same out back by the lake. There was Molly with a couple of others who were comforting her. Right then, the phone's heavy ring woke him from his supplications. He was glad to be taken away from that scene of mourning. It was too much. Hello? Mr. Rees? Yes? Library. Your report's in. How late will you be open this evening? She hung up instead of responding. He had almost all he could stand of these lousy natives from this town. Hearing Molly's cries in the distance made Alex's skin crawl. Hiding his gun back under the couch, he grabbed his keys and brass knuckles and soon headed out the door. As he exited the estate, he saw even more people showing up to see the dead body that was just now being pulled ashore. 4. Michelle, trying to call Alex from her grandmother's house, after the second time with no answer, became worried. Only since the strange things that had happened to her there. Her grandmother, Junie, was a delightful woman. She was full of joy and would often tell her, life doesn't start till you're 50. Why is that? She would ask. One doesn't have the good sense of wisdom, and the many disciplines, to appreciate living until then. However, Grandma Junie was also the person who when she, Michelle, was little and would act up, would make her fetch a switch. A nice ripe one for pacifying her with. Appropriately, her son grew up to be a killer by dispatching Michelle's mother, even though the details have always been vague at best. Now that she thought about it, blaming her father for her messed up life was how she learned to deal with tough situations. Nevertheless, the older she got, the more she grew to question the whole affair. "I'll be back, Grandma," she said to Junie as she spoon-fed her own mother, Iris. Her eyes stood wide, half of her face locked in a perpetual grimace. "Okay, dear." The door made a loud clamor on her way out. As Michelle got into her car, she figured she would go over there and at the very least check on him. Switching on the radio for some music for the drive, the sky was morphing from morning into noon. She couldn't seem to get that room out of her head. She raised the volume on the radio. Alton, not being enormous, had its share of rumors through the years about the estate at 2147. Everything, from it being infested with demons to the seminal owners being commissioned by the devil himself to build the structure. One tale that Grandma Junie used to frighten Michelle with as a child was where the builders had poured blood into the first cornerstone. Some even said that they built the entire property on ancient interment grounds. Being infested by elementals from the shamans and witch doctors, who summoned the otherworldly fiends to protect the burial mounds if they themselves were eradicated. However, this is where Grandma Junie had lost her somewhere in the story's telling. She made a right at the lights and went down Madison Avenue. There were a lot of police out, she thought to herself. Then, noticing more people, she questioned if today was a holiday. Alton hosted legendary parades a few times a year. Her musings again turned to Alex. He was a strange one. She just wondered how that bathroom did not freak him out. Later, she would talk to him about it. Heading down to State Street, she made a sharp left and sped down to Edison. The double doors at Alex's were closed from where she could see. At any rate, since the gate was unlocked, she parked inside. As she did so, she noticed what looked to be a detective and police officer leaving. He must have been talking to the couple from downstairs. As he was pulling away, he peered at her. She didn't know what it was about him, but his glances gave her the creeps. After she parked and had gone up and met Clark and Holly outside, she inquired as to Alex, and they said that they had seen him in town. She told them she would wait. Holly commented on how pretty she was, remarking, "She is a natural beauty, and the makeup that she wears only brings it out." When she asked Clark, "Isn't she, babe? Isn't she a beauty?" he agreed that she was. Then Holly said she would see him in the house. Michelle, taking her time rolling up her windows, was checking messages for a few minutes on her tel when she walked through the front of the estate's doors to sit on Alex's steps. As she crossed over the threshold, he grabbed her. 5. The dreams were becoming more intense in the last couple of days. More so than they had been. He assumed yesterday he'd escaped the worst of the visions that would in most cases follow each murder. Though, this morning he didn't have such wishful apprehensions. The only way of measuring it to Curtis was by the visitations. As time went by, the manifestations were he thought to be becoming less frequent and bothersome. Though, they have proven to be getting worse. Yesterday, after the argument, they were in bed sleeping and he awoke with a start. The dreams had been a replay of what had happened that night in the motel. Now, since this new round of problems has escalated toward the trial, and Becky has been trying to tie up loose ends, the manifestations are restless, it seems. This morning, the specter at the man that Becky had last killed came around knocking on the door of his unconscious and presently, his reality. They were affecting his life to a greater degree than ever before. That singular mass still shows up sometimes within and without his dreams as well. The latter was even now about the property, every so often saying his name from the shadows. He had grown to where he could sense them. He knew it was there, just out of frame. Lingering in that damn corner, the one with all the spider's webs. After falling asleep, he made it until about 30 minutes ago free of the midnight visions. Now though, they had returned. That old friend Death had dropped off what Becky and himself had made. Tonight, his dream was about the corner market that he goes to each morning. He showed up at dawn as usual and got his pack of cigarettes and beer as always, but instead of Jason or Todd on duty, it was him. Louis was his name. Going up to stand in line, there appeared to be no one else in the store. The walking corpse came stumbling out from the back of the store. When Becky aimed for the man's chest though, she shot him in the shoulder. He had, at the worst possible moment, woken up. He tried to get up, but his shoulder was blown out, and after looking from Becky to himself, he pointed at them with his good arm and said, "You," in a moaning gasp. This time, she aimed for his forehead. For all intents and purposes, she shot him in his left eye. The bullet exited out the side of the back of his head. Right, mind you, the deceased stood at the counter. The strange fog was about the floor and Curtis couldn't seem to get the sight of the murder out of his head. Now, here he sat, staring at the clock. Around the corner came Louis, plodding through the room. Smoke followed along the ground, and when he got in front of him, he tried to speak, but could only manage to moan in tormented agony and glare at him. Turning back around, Louis reached for him, seeming to recognize his face. As he did so, he put both arms out reaching, but couldn't get through the furniture. Once he had gotten close enough to touch him, but could only say, "You." He was still too far back. A mindless thing he was now. A shadow of his former self. This is how until the sun rose. That deceased man, roaming around, playing the living in Curtis' home. He sat there smoking, calmly drinking coffee as the manifestations haunted, threatening to drive him to madness. 6. Alex, having made it to the top of the steps, saw that the hardware store had a sign up out front. It explained that they were closed for maintenance. He looked into the window. It seemed like there was a lot of damage done. He gazed at his reflection in the glass. Squinting his eyes, he focused and realized that he had been correct. Someone was watching him. As he was crossing the boulevard at the four-way stop, he noticed that what he had taken for a man talking on his phone was the same person who had been following him since he left. After reaching the library and meeting the same ladies with the same foul attitudes, he returned the statement and signed off on the new one, deciding to read it while he was here so that he could return it. He wasn't expecting to be in town for very much longer. This motion of discovery, being like the other, told of a Patrick Crenshaw that lived at his address, had been a photographer for St. Louis County, and did a photograph of people standing together during a riot. Strength Faced with Obscurity it was called. They nominated the image for Time magazine's Photo of the Year and won. After this, he struck minor success. He retired as a county employee. That's all that document explained on the matter. Packed into the end of the report was also a summary statement from the local newspaper. Scanning the contents, it referred back to this same person that had produced the book. 4 girls' bodies had been discovered between that spring and the next. Stabbed to death with a butcher's knife. They had discovered the last 2 with photos on the scene from the earlier crimes, implicating Crenshaw. During the investigation, having pissed a few of the other photographers from the police station off, he had inadvertently secured himself as a prime suspect. To this very day, they never got the killer, and Crenshaw is still blamed for the murders, even after his disappearance. The first thing Alex wanted to do was make plans to leave all this drama far behind, but wasn't that what he was doing in coming to Alton in the first place? He put the report back in the tube and deposited it in the return box. As he was exiting the door, he nearly collided into someone. "Excuse me, Mr. Rees?" "Detective," Alex said as he walked away from the whole mess. Abernathy watched him cross the street, back to the way he had come. Chapter 6. 1. Alex, wondering as to the mental state of Molly, left in search of her abode. Though he couldn't find the place. After making his way back home, he tried to call Michelle. There was no answer. He wanted to touch base with her. It had been nice spending time together. Assuming she was busy with her grandmother, he figured he would work on one of the drawers from the other night. Possibly to gift her with. 2. Now, for just a moment, let's, shall we say, veer off the beaten path. 4. Some tracks are not simply trodden upon, some are slithered through. It seems no accident that snakes are a popular symbol for evil, existing as they do. In contrast to other creeping things, that not only to live, but to make oneself feel whole, require a certain love. Though, serpents in most cases only tend to strike when threatened. So, when Holly Hamilton met Clark for example, after absconding to Los Angeles when she was just 18. This taking place only 2 months after she'd arrived. She had seen firsthand the sacrifices that a girl made by putting herself in places where others already had their own destinies all laid out. They have the power to change fate so that the machine keeps turning. In most cases things, if left to their own devices, can fall out of hand. The excess giving vent to a gluttony that if not held in check, threatens to bring about the immediate or prolonged demise of the servitor. It looked as beautiful as it did every other day when she opened the lid and pulled it out. In contrast to Holly was by all events and purposes, Clark. Here he was now in the basement, doing the damn thing. The girl is in the corner, her mouth taped shut so that she can't scream anymore. The one time would be the last. What was his next move? The cupboard door swung open and popped closed again. He was ready to have all this craziness finished. Clark was once a top surgeon in the US. To any other gifted drive, it may not seem like much, but his brother and two sisters that he had left in Germany thought it was. He had created a name for himself which at first was a struggle. Though the book deal was nice. He discovered from the day he'd arrived that love wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. His first wife, after glimpsing his true face, got away within an inch of her life with their young son in tow just behind her. Only a few years earlier, Clark was introduced to his agent Carl, who owned a well-to-do publishing house. He had seen Clark's medical journals and was astonished. Here was a doctor who made leaps and bounds as far as stem cell research goes, and his artwork was unto a category of all its own. True, the squeamish couldn't stomach the man's art, the rest loved it. He would spend his time making dioramas of the various kidneys and other altered organs and appendages that he found and created, sewn together, and grew. Carl had made him a pretty penny back at the beginning. Soon questions arose as to the specific body parts of such and such specimens and as to their origins and their authenticity, which were at first ignored and later addressed. Carl, one day, told the questioners that they were not real, which of course Clark didn't like because it discredited the popular journals he had already published by himself. So, after the fourth week he made a deal with the man. Or at least that's what he had arranged for their last meeting to discuss. When his partner had arrived, he chopped him up into little pieces with a cleaver. This was around the same time Holly was given her violin. Now, what to do with the girl? Thinking back to when his wife had asked where they had gotten the meat, he told her that it came from the corruption of the world. Then he reminded her, it wasn't a lot. Only what he had cut off a small buck. They had 2 or 3 wonderful stews, albeit considering it today, left a bitter taste in his mouth. He chuckled at his own joke. I might as well get started. He turned and looked at her. All right. It's time to inspect you. Michelle, instead of acting how she felt and pulling away, only watched his movements. Are you going to follow my directions? She bobbed her head up and down as he got close enough so that she could smell his aftershave through that thing that he wore. Do what I say, and you'll be fine, okay? She shook her head in assent. Don't scream or I will gut you like a pig, he told her. Soon after, he approached her to cut her clothes off with a pair of surgical scissors. Holly was playing her violin and from the basement, Michelle's sobs were cancelled down to a low purr. He knew all the scores his wife played by now, he mused as he whistled a long tune. A couple of times Michelle had made eye contact with him, she had by then seen his face. Not the regular, out-in-public mask of his own flesh that he was forced to put on day in and day out like the other Sims, but his real one. Clark's came in the form of Carl's long-dead one. He still had it all these years later, with the buckles and straps binding it to him intimately. Although, he couldn't wear it under the direct sunlight. For it would cause immediate decay. Nevertheless, it was a small price to pay for the elation he felt with it on. Having finished with Michelle, he stalked off to put everything away. He went to his private fridge to make sure that the specimen looked good so that he could take his photos. How he would love to see the look on the coroner's face when they saw what was missing from his latest victim. For it was original, in every sense of the word. 3. Alex, after getting home, drank himself into a stupor. Then, going through his old sketchbooks, his mind wandered. Wandering off into that red volume. The one with the bloody history that was his own. He was now dozed, way past any of the deaths, stories or betrayals. Alex flew through the clouds, overjoyed that the sun wasn't up yet in this place. He found a spot along the underside of a cloud to perch and reflect upon. Meanwhile, in the room, the shadows stirred and there was the lonely song of the violin. The elemental Luciform stood watching the gate at the bathroom door in Alex's apartment, mouthing little cantrips and charms to rouse his sleeping body. He staggered around for a moment and made his sleepy way over to the far side of the room. It waited there, pacing back and forth, stopping every so often, putting its hands on its knees and breathing in deep. An elemental made flesh. Mortals, a long time ago had forgotten the entity's name. Any manifestation of its principal incarnation had more times than not been just vague associations with an act or a deed carried out by others for the creature to feed. It hissed. In the darkness of this reality, the beast needed humans to play avatar or host so that beneath the right correlation of stars and with enough spilled blood, it could feed its carnal lust. Alex stumbled and almost fell forward on his path. The creature lingered there, thirsting. Perhaps, sometime in the past, the monstrosity had been whispered about as a healer of sorts, but the road to salvation is often littered with bones. Smoke appeared like heavy blankets of dry ice as the great giver of truth eagerly watched. The magnificent beast of awakenings it was once called. However, for one to find their own true enlightenment, you would have to offer one act for the other, or sufficient sustenance. All to gain that defining revelation, to be paid through existential suffering. Not at all unlike what the faithful would call corporal mortification. Curiosity is often met with futility. It only needed the black juice to open the gap in the chasm for itself to slide in. The acorate nectar was just the means to the desired awakening's end. Its calling and duty was to feed upon the variety of living victims who lived in the shadow of the fears of the answers to questions that aren't fathomable during the light of day. The ones couldn't face the truth, and if held under the luciform sway, the brain would discharge a congealed protoplasm, supplying the ripe sucker for the demon. Be that as it may, these creatures are timeless and are evoked by a priest or shaman gifted in the rituals of that greatest of all sages and magicians, Solomon himself. The king that had brought such monstrosities through the void. The malevolent beings that the monarch had captured, he had bound within a brass urn. The creatures, when allowed to venture past their brazen borders, were made to build his temple. Sharpening and refining the incantations to pull off such an operation can, when once mastered, allocate the magician to call many of those of the Geetic breed through dimension and time. The creature babbled and waved its tongue back and forth from the doorway in anticipation. Long strings of toxic saliva dripped from its open mouth to the tiled floor, sizzling much like acid. Stumbling into the proximity of the threshold, the demon, knowing its prey was so close, had fits of shaking that ran through its frame. Its two eyes that were on each side of its skull blinked wildly. Its flat nose dripped wet with moisture. 100 bulnoid teeth lined up in 4 rows, chattering at measured intervals. Alex's sleeping body walked through the bathroom door and the fiend mounted his back, wrapping its winged appendages around his skull. Another manifestation of the being spun him around, ever eager to begin. His eyes were now black except for the white highlights that were within each. This is an effect of having the beast possess one. As it stood its subject in front of the mirror, it conjured a thick ebony to the surface of its host. At that same instant, as Alex was floating up in the clouds, the creature, having other emanations of itself in each dimension of existence, came up and tightly restricted him in a sort of full Nelson, and he was all of a sudden aware. A reeling of matched essences coalesced as the first version of itself deposited its needle-like point upon the base of his neck. Its quaking form was being brought to zero as it slid in. It traveled all the way to the bone and a little more. Penetrating and in effect, tapping his spine. He spasmed and had a seizure, hitting the floor hard. He was too far gone into the inside out and beyond human understanding to know what was happening. 4. I think I found it, Becky said as Curtis entered the garage. It was in a complete state of chaos. Cans and beer bottles adorned every surface. Ashtrays that were filled, were spilled out onto the floor. A yellow light appeared through one of the small cracks. They looked strange there, the photons glowing during the day. Little illuminations giving the promise that all, once they have achieved it, could turn everything back to normal again. At any rate, catching that radiance and storing it on a shelf was quite a different story. That bitch's address. I thought it ended with him? It ends when I say it ends. She yelled, spittle showering his face. He just closed his eyes and let her finish. You started it when you fucked around with that bitch. He presumed she was going to end the sentence with a follow-up insult. Though, as he opened one eye and then the other, she was walking away, shaking her head. We've already waited too long. Believe me, when they get her up there on the stand next week and she's telling them everything she knows about us, you'll be glad I put forth the effort. Well, you're the one that scared her, saying you were going to kill her. I assumed that after I had, she would have stopped pursuing things, she said with her head down in consternation. The shadows stirred up after this exchange, sending motes of dust spiraling, gathering in convergence, so it seemed. I figured it would end with that, but it only got the two of you up to sneaking around even more. She finished with an ever-growing attitude. Anyway, in the motion of discovery, that dummy lawyer of hers put that bitch's parents' address on there. How dumb is that? Curtis said. So, what now? Same plan? We go in and execute her, and then what? She just squinted at the ground, lost in thought. He took his chance. And what? You think everything will be better? It has to be better than this, she said. I work hard to support this family. She mocked him, anger rising with each syllable. I work hard to provide for this family. As a result, she switched into out-of-control Becky again. I didn't mean that. Knowing that you fucked around with that whore, I meant. Curtis stared down at the drudgery. Shame in his demeanor. I messaged that bastard that kicked your ass, too. I was drunk. You know what? She began and then held herself in check. Nice and controlled. They sat in silence for a moment. He thought she was going to fly off into a fit of new threats and fearing the worst, but to his surprise, she was still just sitting on a stool opposite himself when he looked back up. Hey, he said as she studied the movement in the shadows, an expression of shame on her face. He knew the shame wasn't hers that she wore, but his. The adulterations had affected her greatly. In Becky's case, instead of being consumed with hatred for the dishonesty of her trust, she was as if blotted with a great stain. The couple now wore the tattoo of the other's deception on their skin, committing them both to the act of the offense. All the while, the betrayed had only sought the other's affection. In consequence, the partner gains a new awareness of fear that one selfish choice of ineptitude against their feelings can bring forth other dynamics of obsession, or even a distorted type of toxic love. Becky was a special cocktail of all those things, combined with a minor capability to create small shades and charms. Never considering it an ability, nor knowing how to utilize it. Despite her consternation of the former, the latter was exceedingly rare. When it ignited each time, she didn't recognize it for what it was. Like the burning sun at noon on the first day of summer, no shadow would gleam. Just the heat of the longest day of the year. 5. Clark had awakened the very real demonic presence that haunts the bathroom on the estate. However, it had to have been conjured originally by a witch or priest who summoned such creatures into material existence. It would have crawled through the chasm of the Manx. This entity was already here, long before Clark stepped foot on this land. Though he was in possession of the correct rituals to reawaken such a demented luciform as this took another, more advanced darkness to deposit such a beast within the confines of the property. For it had been there for many thousands of years and would often sleep to pass the millennia. For Clark's mind, being held in dormant suspension by the lost cycle of decades since, paid no attention to it. He was beyond such creatures in his own sphere of destiny. Now was its time to work its will upon man. 4. Its services were not yet near completion. The capriform put its many claws around his throat and strangled him. After a moment, he gave a little protest, trying to vainly swing with as much strength as he could muster. Giving up his thrashings, his resistance soon ceased, and he lay motionless. Having brought him to the point of death, it would leave him be. Then, shortly thereafter, would begin the torments afresh. During these awareness sessions, the demon, to feed, needed to penetrate its subject's skull. Withdrawing its power and the ethereal aspect of itself, it leapt off of him and began mentally bombarding his conscious. Alex was in the dream, albeit still aware of his physical body, which lay upon the tiled floor in sleep paralysis. When he could, he gulped down a throatful of air. Somewhere, between these breaths, there was a shock to his system. It created a single call of fusion in his brain. Instead of seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, flashes assailed Alex's mind with visions of Amy from when they had first met. The scene morphs into a very realistic memory of where Alex and Amy were on their first date together in St. Louis. Even now, it was like it was on that balmy 4th of July. The images attacking his cerebral cortex in violent waves of recollection, his chest quaked, and his mind bent. They were so in love, and he felt such warmth, but this isn't what the entity cared about. The sustenance that the creature so vehemently craved was here, just beneath the surface. It could smell it. Turning his head back and forth, was a nice blackened spot of memory for it to feast upon. Amy was screaming in his face. The arguing at the end was the most enduring thing he had ever had to go through in his life. True, she held the power to make him the happiest guy in the world, notwithstanding, she could also turn it all to shit, fast. For 2 months, she was so hateful, but the grief over her death caused Alex to lose sight of this and to forget how terrible things had gotten. The axiom being revealed before his eyes so that the luciform forced him to see the truth in its house of reality. The demon pulled forth a considerable dose of ectoplasm that was blistering at the top and gorged upon the strange substance, inhaling big gulps of the stuff. Since each breath of the liquid was only to be excreted during these awakening sessions, it popped the sack that it was in. The abomination spilled the black nectar all over itself, licking at the spots where it contacted and hissed. The beast's eyes fluttered in orgasmic ecstasy as the stench was ingested within its bat-like nose. Small parachute pockets burst with the clever use of its forked tongue, and bubbled along with the convoluted blister sacs, and when they cracked open, his mind did as well. He was suspended in animation, appearing as a splash of insects that were caught and then dropped upon a wave of cold emptiness. Now, the frame is from just after she died, and they had arrested him when those damn detectives from Madison County back home had taken him in during their interrogations and had shown him the pictures of the bathroom, trying to make him confess. Oh God, no, he cried for them to take the photos away. I don't want to see. The beast, finding this memory still not black enough, turned the entire operation around and found an even inkier spot to work its will upon. Now, the vision was where she had him backed into a corner, accusing him of all the things that he had caught her doing herself, all of it. In his mind, the nature of internment was spinning amidst a vortex. Detectives had, during this same time, apprehended the boyfriend, who was there during the woman's final hours. However, the charges had soon been dropped with having nothing to hold him on, other than suspicion. When they asked him why she had done it, he said he wasn't sure, but yes, they had been arguing over the two of them not being together and him not leaving the mother of his children. Only after a few failed attempts, the woman had grown impatient. Before long, after an evening of partying and in a frenzy, she had taken the suspect's gun and shot herself in the bathroom of the motel where they found her. No, no, no. It couldn't be true, Alex thought. Or did he know better and was just holding on to the fact that she, Amy, had been there with that other guy, for whatever reason had committed suicide? And had been leading a completely hidden life, detached from Alex's own? Only he knew that man wasn't her boyfriend. He was her killer. The creature adjusted its grip on his mind. This time, the elemental's grasp was too much. Alex's head drooped and his legs buckled beneath him. Now, they were both on that Ferris wheel again. Even before they moved in together, she had hidden things from him. His essence was spun into the manifestation of a viewer, seeing his own corporeality as it delivered the rectitude. The bestower of sweet agony, fed. It was as plain as the emptiness that was left within his chest. The evidence was all right there. Perfectly in tune with the events. He had been wrong about her death. Wrong. She had done it because she was in love with this other guy. The one who was there. She had loved him more than Alex. He could see that now. From here in the embrace of the Great Awakener, it all made sense. All at once, 100 distinct reasons to see flashed before his eyes. God, Michelle was right. He needed to move on. He just stayed where he was, sobbing. Coming to terms with what had taken place. The demon, having gorged itself to its breaking point, rescinded its needle from his spine and its grip on his mind, creeping back into the furthest corners of the room. Whatever happened to Alex now didn't concern the vile thing. It desired rest. There was no need to remain in this dimension of existence for a while. Even life and death were trivial to such creatures, and places. There was only thirst. And to feed, albeit one day, to breed. As the elemental made its descent, it caught sight of the woman playing her violin and her husband, with his prisoner in the basement. It retired to its own corner of our shared reality, to lie in wait, dreaming of internment and of giving birth to fresh horrors to feed upon the fears of man. Chapter 7. 1. Alex, after his awakening session, slept better than he could remember for a long time. Crawling out of bed, he felt so light and unburdened now, a kind of peace fell over him. However, coming closer than he had known to dying, he glanced into the mirror that reflected his pallid form. He would have agreed had someone told him that he looked like death warmed over. For the signs were there. After rising, he was about to go into the kitchen to grab some water when peering through the blinds, he saw it had been raining out and a figure was out by the lake. As if tempting it to rise. On further inspection he realized it was Molly, Morning. He was on his way to give her his sympathies when something instructed him to call Michelle again, but before he got the chance, the phone rang. The sound, enough to jar the device and the table that it sat upon, screamed discordantly. Hello? Alex? Hey, it's Mark. How are you doing? I'm good. Have you seen Michelle? Not in a couple of days. I'm about to call her now though. Okay, cool. Well, her grandma's worried sick. Has her dad looking for her? I'm working to get a hold of her now. Let me know on your end if you hear from her first. Yeah, no problem. Hanging up, Alex tried to call her. There was no answer. He left a message and was about to give it another attempt when he dropped the receiver, thumping onto the carpet. Outside, he saw those same phantoms. Walking through the house, the violin player was going at it once again. This time, the performer attacked the strings with vigor and a teeth that was absent before. As Alex passed out of the back, the screen door smacked upon its threshold. The sound brought him back full circle to where he could discern the sober domesticated happenings of the neighborhood with clarity. He headed towards her. "Molly," he said as he approached. She turned in his direction with her blank eyes radiating sadness. "Now look. He's killed him." "Clark?" "Yes," she hissed. "We will find out soon enough. There are detectives around." "I don't care about no damn detectives. If they could help, they would have already done so." "No, I'm leaving. There's nothing left for me here." "Where are you going?" She walked up and embraced him. "I'll be fine. I'm getting away from that damn house. My mama, when her friend never returned, cursed this place. His soul is in unrest. Something must have upset the curse and it awoke. Now, you go do what you're supposed to do." She turned, and without a glance back, kept going in the opposite direction. After she had gone, a curious set of circumstances occurred. Alex's couple of loose sheets of paper fall from his balcony. Sprinting across the yard, he retrieved the leaves. They were pages out of his sketchbook. For one split moment, the violin ceased its whining tune. Below the grumbling surface of it all, just beyond the voice of the instrument, Michelle's phone was ringing. He had left his own tel off the hook when he had dropped it, and in effect, it was still trying to call her. Advancing closer to where he thought the ring was coming from, and before long, his head bumped against the cellar window. Clark and Holly's cellar window. 2. He didn't know what to do, but by the time he got back upstairs a plan had already been formed. He would take Holly's notebook, the one that he found on the deck, and ask if they had seen Michelle. Having not a better idea, he half hoped that the detective or that damned deputy was still watching him. On his way out the door he grabbed his gun from under the couch and put it into his pocket. Descending the steps, he took a breath and then knocked. At once, a very nervous-looking Clark answered. The noise from the violin was so loud that Alex had to raise his voice. Glancing down at the notebook in his hand, Clark greeted him. "Alex, what an unexpected, yet pleasant surprise." "Hey Clark. I found this on the patio the night before last and wanted to return it. Also, I needed to ask if you or your wife had seen my friend? That girl I had with me the other day, Michelle?" To Alex, Clark was with nervousness like he did his own flesh and was at the very least guilty of having her phone. It was unmistakable. "Nope. I've been busy working. I'll give this to Holly," he announced to Alex with the ever so hint of a grin. As if he could barely hold in a laughing fit during the exchange. "Okay, thanks," he said and stepped aside. When he turned to leave was when he had struck. Clark had invariably seen the pistol through the reflection in the glass from outside his door. For, in Alex's haste, he had forgotten about the mirror that hung across from his neighbor's front door and had so given himself away. The older man plucked the gun out of his pocket and with the same quick motion brought it down, hitting him with it. For Alex, the events thenceforth were black. 3. "Okay, it's done," Curtis said. "The babysitter knows that we're going to be late?" "Yes." "Well, come on." He got into the other side of the truck. They drove in silence for a while. Becky navigated them onto the highway from Alton and it wasn't long before they were approaching the Pontoon Beach exit. Speeding around the turnpike and they were on Lake Drive only a few short moments later. "When we get there, I'm going to go through the back, and you wait for the signal and then come through the front so we can surprise whoever is home." "Okay. Questions?" The air began to slightly scintillate with the darkness that was working its enthusiasm upon her, forming small spheres of corruption. Curtis shook his head as he studied that unmistakable madness in her eyes. They parked on a mostly deserted street after circling 2 blocks from the woman's building, staking the place out. She pulled her circus mask down and headed on her way to kick off tonight's devil's work. Before he ever got the chance to think this through, he heard a gunshot from within a house. Chapter 8. 1. Clump. Clark dropped the limp body onto the gurney. After putting Alex's arms down to his sides, he fastened the straps on his legs. Michelle just watched as he worked with uncanny medical accuracy. Having the grim business done and over, he now secured his latest victim. He had to stop to get some air, so he walked outside for a moment to catch his breath. This used to be so much easier for him. His chest burned from the effort. When he felt a little better, he surveyed the area and, finding nothing worth noting, fled back inside. Back down in the cellar, Michelle was struggling to rouse Alex from his slumber. His eyes were closed, and his mouth hung slack, but he was breathing. Hearing footsteps, he then went up the stairs and shut the door. She exhaled. "Good. She had a minute to think. Trying to unravel Clark was no simple task, for she still didn't understand his motives for it all. Boiling it down to he was mad. However, Michelle had a spiritual awakening of her own. When the situations with Clark were at their most demanding, she would turn her thoughts to memories of her father. Not the usual hatred that would flash up in her mind's eye at the times when she was the angriest. It was more of a synchronization, or a moment of clarity for her. Her parents had been together for 5 years when it happened. She was at the Chain of Rocks Hotel with a man that she, her mother, explained to her was her Uncle Danny. After the murder took place and she, Michelle, was staying with Grandma Junie, that said what they had. Which was, the only reason they gave him such a long prison sentence was because of the specific bans that the county had on weapons and something about jurisdictions. They couldn't blame him, his lawyer had said. Her mom had been a hard woman to be with. The home videos had shown the abuses she had put her father through. Michelle had suppressed those facts. She would not lie to herself any longer. She decided that if she made it out of this alive, she was going to build a relationship with him. As she was contemplating this, 2 different things occurred at once. Alex stirred from the examination table he was on and the exit to the laboratory moved from a suction of air. The devil himself was up the stairs and the violin was singing an excitable tune, sounding like the player's own rendition of Danse Macabre. Suddenly, the door opened of its own accord and out from the other side appeared an actual woman that was accompanied by phantoms, made of smoke. Michelle had seen a lot since she arrived here, but now she almost couldn't believe her eyes. Alex. Alex, the woman hissed into the room. He stirred. He's knocked out. The woman was shocked at the sound of Michelle's voice. It was so quiet down here that she had thought Alex was alone. The killer is upstairs, and Alex is on the table next to me, sleeping. Are you tied up? Yes. Here. I'll try to free you and then I'm getting out of here. Molly wasn't able to get through the medical trays reaching Michelle, so she undid Alex's feet and reaching as far as she could, began wrestling with one of his wrists. He shook his head and opened his eyes. Molly, what are you doing? He asked. Getting your ass out of here. One arm was loose and not having any luck with the other. Molly sounded like she had whispered to someone within the shadows. Alex chanced to look over at Michelle. She appeared different now. The drive seemed to have made her into a new woman. 2. Becky's charms wound their twisted way to Curtis on some occasions. Tonight was one of them. Hearing a muffled shout and then a gunshot, he opened the front screen and tried the door. It opened with a screech, and he walked right in. The interior of the house was bathed in darkness and there was a dog somewhere screaming in its cage. Under the cacophony he could just make out Becky's voice coming from the back of the house. Passing through the dining room, he found the girl's grandfather. Becky had dispatched him with a shot to the side of the temple, his head bowed as if in prayer. Curtis burst into the bedroom. It was dark and the girl was squealing and crying, trying to hide from Becky under a makeup vanity. Okay Kurt, do what we came here to do. Finish this, and reasoning that he might as well just get this over with, he pointed the gun at Becky and fired. The bullet hit her in the shoulder. She fell against the wall and struggled to get up, in shock. He fired again and it missed. Running the few steps to meet her, he put the pistol to her head and watched her skull explode. Next, he looked over at the woman. I'm sorry, he said, and at that time, he ended his own life. The house was silent except for the dog that was going crazy in the other room. Small wonder, right then the woman realized that she should have never even messed with Curtis. About 5 minutes later, the police showed up. Someone along the block must have called them. When they discovered the survivor, she was staring at the wall, babbling something about regrets. 3. Boom. A gun fired and Molly's shocked eyes looked at Alex and she fell forward, thumping onto the ground. At the sight of Clark, Alex was terrified. For Clark sported a mask that was another man's face altogether, strapped to his head. When he stood over Molly's body, that's when Alex put his plan into effect. He kicked the gun as hard as he could. Clark had seen it coming and jerked his hand away and in effect, flinging the weapon. That's when Alex hit him in the temple with the medical hammer. It was the closest thing Molly could pass him at a moment's notice. The device found its mark with a sickening crack and stuck there, lodged. He staggered as blood came out in short squirts. He shook his head back and forth, then regained his balance. Alex was just still, and Michelle watched in horror. The drive malevolently popped his neck from side to side. Did you know that bitch Amy was pregnant? Clark asked as he turned around. He walked over and opened his cabinet doors. Returning. Did you hear me, boy? A girl like her, he said, nodding to Michelle. Needs a real man. Now that she's had a taste of one, you might as well give up. He licked his lips from within the mask and Alex cringed. You couldn't even knock me up. Someone else did. As soon as he was about to respond, the skewer flashed under the dingy light. Arching down, it chopped off 3 of his fingers at a crooked angle. He screamed in protest. There was a sound in Alex's head that was deafening, but it wasn't noise. It was more of a lack thereof. At that moment, he realized the violin had stopped its morbid tune. As Clark raised the knife again, everything was suspended in motion. With a wave, it all came flooding back. All at once the silence was shattered into fragments. I should have done this a long time ago, Holly declared, having retrieved the gun off the ground and was now pointing it at her husband. She cocked it. Click. Honey, I was joking. She's nothing, he said, pointing to Michelle. Boom. The gun fired. After withstanding the recoil, he swung his good arm at her, chopping a heavy gash into her shoulder with the cleaver. It went through bone and gristle several inches. Blood began pumping out. She looked down for a second at the large skewer, surprised, and collapsed. As she fell, her weight upon the butcher's knife pulled Clark down with her. Swaying on one knee to catch his balance, he held fast. The medical hammer was stuck in his mask, waving back and forth. Holly gave up and let go of her husband. He took a deep gasp and prepared to rise as his true face wore an expression of self-satisfaction. Though, nevertheless, he simply slumped over, that breath had been his last. Alex and Michelle were gazing at each other when Detective Abernathy and his deputy burst through the metal door. They both stood in abject horror as they took in the scene's carnage. The delegate was so frightened that he fled the room. Within a few moments, the chamber was full of officers and agents. Presently, 2 EMTs came in and saw to it that any survivors got proper treatment. 4. And now, here we are, Alex told a recovering Michelle from the phone. I'm just glad you made it out alive. Right. So, you had come searching for me and he just grabbed you? Yeah, it was nuts. I never would have expected it. By the way, how's your friend Molly doing? Still hasn't woken up. She's in a coma. The drive says she will wake up anytime. Damn. Right. So, I was thinking, maybe we could hang out again sometime. It was nice. I don't know. I've been talking to a guy. Oh yeah, who's that? You remember the EMTs that saved our lives? I think Holly saved our lives, but yeah, go on? The one that found me. I think I'm in love with him and that he came there, to save me. Oh. That's different. Yeah, but anyway, Michelle said, sidestepping the awkwardness. What's the deal with all the Amy stuff? At the name, Alex's stomach sunk a bit. Oh, well, come to find out, the officers are telling me that Guy Curtis, I guess Amy was seeing. Do you remember any of that? Oh, you're coming to terms with it? Yeah, I do, vaguely. Huh. Well, he and his wife, they're both dead now. The police say that she killed up to 5 people. All the women that she could find that he had cheated on her with and some of their boyfriends too. Some sort of cleansing ritual. It was all written down in her diary. Wow. That's crazy. Hey, I've got to run. I'll talk to you soon, okay? Yeah. Take care of yourself. You too, Michelle. They hung up, and each headed onto their own separate paths. 5. Now, weeks later, as Michelle was introducing her father and stepmother to her EMT, Alex was going to his new home. The estate at 2147 Edison was now his. The Hamiltons, having no heirs to bequeath the manor upon in their will, lost it when the property was seized. The acquisitions company wanted nothing to do with the place now. Alex, while attending the police auction, had bought the deed for a bit of cash. From time to time, he visits the Alton Cemetery and puts a rose on Holly's grave to say thank you. Molly, having woken up, has the other side of the house. Notwithstanding, she was at first reluctant. Her brother stays with her in the manifested form that he now takes. Apparitions that appeared like specters would, from time to time, be seen running around haunting the property. Alex himself is in the middle of a new project. Since losing his fingers, he has been redoing the basement. Originally out of boredom, but now, out of obsession. There doesn't seem to be any other elemental manifestations lurking about anymore. Though, some things sleep for a while before reawakening. Thinking back to when it all first started, it had to have been the night of the earthquake. Though, Clark, by his own dark deeds, added to the malevolence. About 2 weeks ago, while cleaning down here in the basement, Alex noticed that there was a considerable fissure in the masonry's east wall. It ran the entire length of the foundation on that side. That night, seeing it had pushed a sizable piece of the concrete free, he peeked his head in as far as he could get it. Inside, he could just make out something that was crammed into the crawl space but couldn't tell what it was. Now tonight, he was going to see. The concrete was strong. Though, after swinging several times with the hammer, the rock cracked and gave way, revealing a hole big enough for him to stick his head and one arm into. "Damn it," he said as he sat the big hammer down. Blood was dripping out of the glove he now wore on his damaged hand. Reaching in at first with his arm and flashlight and then his head, he could see all the way to the back of the crawl space now. He focused the beam of illumination onto a plastic bag that had what seemed to be a skeleton bound up within. Next to it was what appeared to be an antique camera. The kind that photographers used to use a few decades ago. The ones with the flashbulbs. Hearing a blood-curdling scream that was cut short, Alex pulled his head out of the crack and looked in the direction it had come from. The end.